What is the creepiest and most unexplainable paranormal experience you've ever had? Not me. But a friend of mine told me about a dream she had years ago about a decrepit old man who was being chased by wolves. In the dream, he kept referring to himself in the third person as Old Skin. Old Skin's gotta get away from the wolves. Eventually, the wolves caught up to him and started ripping him to pieces in front of her. And he kept narrating the events in a monotone voice. Old Skin's being eaten alive. Old Skin's gonna die. She woke up feeling creeped out. But the weirdest part came when she started describing the dream to her brother. He stopped her mid-sentence and asked, "Was his name Old Skin?" I had the exact same dream. I don't know if that counts as paranormal, but it's fucking creepy. When I was in elementary school, I shared a queen-size bed with my older sister, and our family dog, a mutt that looked like a short-haired lassie, would sleep at the foot of our bed every night. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up one night around midnight and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was entirely in black without any eyes or a face. I tried to wake my sister up, but she rolled over to go back to sleep. My sister must have accidentally kicked the dog, because the dog woke up and raised her head and started growling at the figure at the foot of the bed. The growling then woke my sister up and she saw the figure and started screaming. When my parents came into the room and turned the light on, nothing was there. To this day, both my sister and I are adamant that we saw a ghost or other demon in our room. We know we aren't crazy because the dog saw it too. When I was about 16 years old, I encountered something that still bugs me to this day. I woke up around 6 AM on a normal weekday and went downstairs to get ready to school. No one else in my family had woken up at this point. I got in the shower, still sleepy and could barely hold my eyes open. After a few minutes of showering, someone tried to get it and I told whoever it was that I was in the shower. The person then proceeded to aggressively open the door. I saw the door handle going up and down like crazy and she whatever knocked on the door harder and harder. And then it suddenly stopped. Didn't think that much about it. But when I got out of the shower, I realized that nobody was up yet. I proceeded with eating breakfast. And after a while my dad came down the stairs. So I asked him if it was he who had wanted to use the bathroom earlier. He said no. And that both my mom and younger brother was still asleep. So it could have not been them either. And even if it had been any family member, they would not have tried to open the door so aggressively at 6 in the morning. First post. Don't hate me. Scared Swede. I used to have this reoccurring dream where this black figure with no face would visit me and try to possess me. It would typically enter my being through my mouth, and at that point I would have no control over my dream. It would tell me to do terrible things to people and it had a scratchy voice. The weirdest part that every time it would be inside me I physically would feel ill. I would wake up with the same feeling, oftentimes vomiting right away. The last time this happened must have been 3 years ago. Growing up, my older brother had a computer program that he used to compose piano music on. I remember I was reading in the living room when I heard the most beautiful violin melody I have ever heard. I listened to the whole thing, which was several minutes long. I walked down the hallway to compliment my brother on his masterpiece when I realized my brother was not using the computer. And I was home alone. When I was a kid, about 7-8 years old, I was on my way to the park. It was in the middle of day in the middle of summer. But as I open the gate I freeze, as I hear a very creepy voice whisper my name in the distance. I look around. No one within sight. And I live in the middle of town, small town. Then I hear it again. But this time closer. Still frozen on the spot. Still scouting for the source of the voice. Then I hear it again. But this time, right in front of my face. I immediately unfreeze. Sprint back inside. And hide under my desk. Shaking like crazy. I never went outside that day. When I was younger, I was sitting in my great-grandmother's living room. This house was known to have some issues in regards to paranormal activity. A lighter was casually sitting on the table. My mother smoked. The lighter literally flew across the room and went into the wall, sticking slightly out of it. This was a closed room with no wind or interference. My mother practically shit her pants, and the only time we ever visited with her was when she came to us. Have not been back to this day. I was a rookie cop when my brother committed suicide. He was one of my older siblings, but we were very close. He died in another state, and I had a lot of guilt then about not recognizing the signs. His remains were in bad shape by the time he was discovered, so it was a closed coffin service. About a week after he died, I was back at work one night, and my partner and I see a pimp pistol whipping one of his girls. I jump out and the pimp sees me and the foot chase was on. I was running after him, gun in hand, and he cuts through a narrow corridor under a building that leads to a courtyard in the middle. Right before I reach the courtyard, I hear "It's okay" in my dead brother's voice. I hit the courtyard and the guy's against the side pointing a gun at my head and squeezes the trigger twice. I froze for a millisecond and then started beating him in the head with my revolver. Till this day, I don't know why I didn't just shoot him, cuff him and walk him back to the street and find my partner. I tell my partner about him squeezing the trigger, but not the voice I heard. We unload the gun .32 revolver, right there, and 2 bullets had strike marks on them. Take the gun to the lab for testing. Tell the tech the story. He puts the 2 bullets with strike marks back in and shoots into the test tank. Both bullets fired. About 2 Decembers ago, my fiancé was over my parents' house with me. My parents had gone to a Christmas party and he was helping me set up the tree and decorate the house. All the stuff is in the attic and everyone has said the attic had a strange feeling about it. So we are up in the attic and he mentions he feels like someone was watching us. I say it's probably just the cat as I hand him boxes. We go downstairs and we are unpacking the boxes when we heard a series of huge thuds. I say the cat must have knocked something down, but my fiancé points out that my cat is on the couch asleep. It scared me and I go outside. At that moment, my parents pull up and my dad tells at me for being outside in the cold without a jacket. My fiancé and I tell my parents we heard something and we were officially creeped out. My mom and fiancé decide to go to the room where the attic entrance is. Lo and behold, a box that had been sitting far away from the stairs had fallen down the stairs. Then there was the time my fiancé and I were sleeping at my parents' house. We were getting comfy and slowly dozing off. All of a sudden, right in my ear, I hear a demented, creepy voice say "sweet dreams" and a cackle. I sit up and grab my fiancé. I asked him if he heard that and he said "heard what?" I tell him I heard a creepy voice in my ear tell me "sweet dreams." And he was like, "Oh, I thought you meant that creepy laugh you just did." But no one was in the room with us and I didn't laugh. Not creepy but kind of cool. My mother split and transplanted a rose bush from my grandfather's farm about 40 years ago. It took but never bloomed. At that point she only kept it because it grew into the fence nicely and kept us kids from climbing it. My grandfather died about 5 years after she transplanted it, and that spring it bloomed red roses. A few years after that my grandmother died in the spring after it bloomed white roses. These are the only 2 years it has ever bloomed. Middle of the night. Sleeping. I hear a sound like someone is taking a paper clip from my desk and throwing it against the wall and it bounces across the desk. I wake up to this noise. Turn on the light right by my bed as I sit up. I look over and see nothing. Weird. As I'm ready to lay back down, my 20-pound steel gumball machine falls from the shelf over my bed directly onto my pillow where my head was not 30 seconds earlier. I flip out and scramble out of my bed as I'm totally taken by surprise. As I stand up I feel something under my feet. A paper clip. I put the murderous gumball machine on the floor, the paper clip back on my desk and crawl into the safety of my comforter. Nothing like that happened again. Edit. The shelf was a bookcase headboard that was only a foot taller than my bed. It probably wouldn't have killed me. Just would have damaged my face, I'm guessing. But I was also 10 years old. So, yeah, no, there's that lack of forethought for you. Just told this story to a coworker. Was around 7 years old and it was near the holidays. The house I grew up in has a downstairs and a basement. So I left my pillow downstairs after a day-long movie binge and went to grab it later that evening. Grab the pillow and look up. See a man on the other side of the room dressed to the nines just looking around paying no attention to me. Weird thing was he was entirely grey. Head to toe. Skin color and everything. Grey. I'm staring. Jaw wide open. Completely petrified with fright. He looks up at me. Notices I'm able to see him. And drops his jaw lower than humanly normal, almost as if he was screaming at me. But without sound. He then ran through the wall and disappeared. I wasn't able to go downstairs if the lights were off until I was a teenager. I was home last year during a break from university with a friend and we decided to go see a friend in a different city in his university. It was a small city with rivers, hills and forests. At night we decided to go in a nearby forest to smoke and drink by a river, but still being on main road. So, we were standing with our car parked and I was drinking and both of them were making joints and smoking. It was about 11 in the night and dead dark with no lights or people for several kilometers. We had been standing there for about an hour when a 25-26-year-old guy came out of tree line and came to me. Talks to me and says this place is not safe at night. You guys should go from here. My friend who used to study there heard me talking to someone and started walking towards me but stopped right there. His face went white and told me to get in car and that we are going. I told the guy thanks and goodbye and turned the car around. For 10 minutes my friend didn't talk and when we were out of the forest, he finally broke his silence and told me that this guy who was talking to me was a boy from his university who died on the same road 2 years back in an accident. We were so scared that we didn't go home that night and spent the rest of night getting high nearby a river. When I was around 12 my mother had to go out of town for a bit and she left me home alone for a few days. We lived close to relatives so it wasn't a big deal back then. She refused to give me a mobile phone because she figured she could just call me on the landline if anything came up. She told me the date when she'd be back and that was that. The date arrives and I hear my mom knocking on the door downstairs. Calling my name. My dog, who loved her, got excited when she heard her voice and ran down ahead to greet her. She got to the door, freaked the hell out and ran back upstairs to me. I refused to go down and open the door. The phone started ringing and the knocking stopped. I picked up the phone to hear my mom say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I have to stay one more day here. I'll head home tomorrow." TLDR, something pretended to be my mom. Didn't fool the dog. Edit, syntax. This didn't happen to me. But it happened to my dad. We used to live in a home that was part of the Underground Railroad. It had a few hidden crawl spaces around the house that was being used as storage in the present. While we lived there my brother started sleepwalking and talking. One night while my parents were sleeping they heard my little brother scream from my bedroom even though he slept downstairs. My dad ran up there but my bedroom door was closed like something was blocking it. So he kicked the door open. But when he kicked it open, a shadow ran past him and my room was ice cold. My brother was laying on my bed, sound asleep, pointing at the closet screaming, "Get her, daddy. Get her." My dad looked but saw nothing but darkness. Quickly picked up my brother who was stiff as a board, covered in sweat, and ran out. When my brother finally woke up that morning he remembered nothing that happened. After we moved out he stopped sleepwalking. When I was growing up, I was tight with the daughter of my dad's cousin. So my second cousin I suppose. Her name was Lisa. We grew much closer as teenagers. Too close really. Anyway, we wised up a little and went our separate ways when it was time for college. A few years passed and I had moved on. One night I got up to take a piss. Didn't bother to turn on the lights. I was washing my hands and glanced in the mirror. There she was. Lisa was standing in the doorway behind me. I heard the echo of her voice. She told me that she still loved me and always would. She then turned and walked out of sight. I stood holding on to the sink for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I calmed myself down and decided it had just been a dream. I tried to go back to bed. My pillow smelled like her. She could have been in the room seconds ago. I laid back down, and as I drifted off to sleep I felt her warm familiar presence against my back. The next morning there was no sign of her. No scent. No indent in the covers. I wrote it off as a dream. I got a call from my mom later that day. She told me Lisa had died a few days earlier. She had been killed by her boyfriend. He got drunk and angry and he hit her, and that was that. I guess she stopped by to see me one last time. To say goodbye before she moved on. Here's to you, Lisa. 20 years later and you're still the only woman I ever truly loved. I have tons of stories, especially since I attended a 140-plus-year-old Native American boarding school. A lot of them happened to other people. But I only had one personal experience. When I was maybe 8 years old I had a puppy that stayed outside. This is the res. All dogs are outside dogs. While I was asleep one night I heard the pup crying and I tried to get up to see what was going on. But I couldn't. I felt like there was two huge hands holding me down by the shoulder. I could move my legs but not my upper half. I opened my eyes but saw nothing. I started to lose my breath because as I was pushing up I was choking myself. My puppy got louder and louder. Then it all stopped. I took a big gasp as I popped up and ran to the front door. I opened it up to see my puppy dead on the porch. No blood. No other animals. I went to bed and the next morning we noticed two eye-looking goggle marks high up on the door. We thought it was dirt but it never could come off. This was on the reservation in middle of nowhere, so skinwalker was a possibility. Otherwise, I really don't know. When I was a kid, I lived in a house that was haunted with all sorts of paranormal beings. One of my first memories was actually an experience with one of these beings. I was about 4 years old. Standing in the entryway in our house. Facing the door. I stop and notice there are two people standing in front of the door. Staring at me. One was a tall, middle-aged man. Dressed in black 1900s era suit. The other was a boy. Wearing what I figure now was a red baseball uniform. The boy looked up at the man and said, "Why is he staring at us?" And the man replied, "It's okay. He can't see us." I still remember that experience clear as day. Almost 14 years later. We also had multiple incidents of poltergeist activity. Stuff like baskets literally flying 10 feet off the wall and aimed at me and my family. Pictures falling daily. Etc. My sister also used to see priests and some of our deceased relatives from her crib. TLDR, I lived in a haunted house.